Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Now then, very happy to say Chris Jones, BBC's rugby union correspondent, is with us on the line. Good evening, long time no talk.
How are you, Joe? Good to be back. All good?
Yeah, great. So we, in this particular slot over the last couple of weeks, have just been talking about how great we think Irish rugby is. And I at this point, enough of that. Why don't you tell us how great you think Irish rugby is?
Well, it's interesting question, because we had Jerry Flannery on our BBC Rugby Union Daily podcast, which is out tomorrow morning. And the question Danny Kerr posed to him, Joe, was, is this the greatest Ireland team of all time? And he paused and thought about it and said, it probably is. And when you're talking about great Irish sides, there's obviously the big caveat that no Irish side has delivered at a Rugby World Cup. And so you look at the Grand Slam winners, 48, long gap to 09, then to 18. But if this crop go on to win the Slam this year and make a dent on the World Cup later in the year, big ifs, I know, you ally that with the way Leinster are going, the strength of the provinces across the piece, then yeah, it's a pretty good time for Irish rugby, isn't it? And I just think back to 2016, just after the 2015 World Cup. Actually, it might have been at the end of 2015. I went to watch Leinster at the RDS against Wasps, and Wasps hammered them 40-odd points. So this has not been something that's been going on for ages, but certainly the last 5 years is probably culminating now. It seems to be the whole game is in pretty good state.
That was Leo Cullen's first European match in charge. Somewhat shell-shocked afterwards, but he's done okay since. And on a serious note, so I'm the hubris, I suspect, to our social media friends watching it on YouTube is nauseating. Do you see any major chinks in the Irish game? Because every side is beatable, and certainly Ireland fall into that bracket. Is there anything jumping out to you?
I mean, it just goes back to that question about whether they can get done in a slow game. And there are only a few examples, and I think that's what people will cling on to. La Rochelle, a couple of Heineken Cups ago, La Rochelle in the final last year, although that was such a tight game. It's hard to look too much into that and use that as a big sort of example of how Leinster were exposed. Ireland in Paris last year, but then they fronted up brilliantly against France in Dublin this. So, yeah, I'd be really interested to see. And look, England are way off at the moment, but if they go to Dublin and the game is quick with lots of ball in play time, I think England will get taken to the cleaners. But if a team like England or France can maybe slow the pace down, make it more of a set piece game, that's not to say Ireland are vulnerable at the set piece. I'm just trying to think of ways that Ireland can be got at. But I wouldn't get too carried away just because of that World Cup draw. Scotland and South Africa, even if Ireland get to the quarters, they'll be beaten up, and then New Zealand or France lie in wait. So it could be that Ireland have a fantastic year, the greatest Irish side of all time, and still just make the quarterfinals, which would be incredibly harsh. But that's the nature of the draw that Ireland have unfortunately got later in the year.
It is. We are acutely aware. We wanted to check.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have to remind you.
No, you really didn't. You really didn't. We wanted to chat to you about this Wales situation.
Yeah.
The great cliche in rugby is that Warren Gatland all these years was a sticking plaster. Even Gatland can't stem the tide here. This situation seems dire. People are generally aware, I'm sure, of the gist. There are 70 Welsh players, give or take, out of contract at the end of this season. The various regions, Cardiff, Ospreys, Dragons, Scarlets, they were given permission to begin contract talks by the Welsh Union at the start of January. However, no talks have really happened because the union hasn't agreed budgets with those regions. So the regions are quite understandably saying, well, I can't really engage in contract talks with players if I don't know how much money we have. And so the players are furious. The quote, I think, which really crystallised the situation in the Daily Mail last week was from an anonymous player. And he said, I can't believe I'm 5 months away from the end of my contract. I'm 8 months away from the World Cup. My future isn't certain yet. Can't apply for a mortgage. I'm on antidepressants. I'm also one big injury away from not having a job in July. Yet I'm starting for Wales every week. And the union is making tens of millions from international matches. And so the prospect of strike has not been taken off the table for the England game. Where do you want to start on this one?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question. Where on earth do you start? like you can talk short term and say, oh, it's about the next 24, 48 hours and placating the players on their three demands, which two of those demands, the 60 cap rule being scrapped and a place at the PRB for the players union, those demands have been met by the power that be. The sticking point in the short term is about these 80% guaranteed contracts with a 20% bonus structure. But the short term is just the symptom. What's happening this week is just a symptom of a much bigger piece in Welsh rugby that goes to the very existential issue of what Welsh rugby is, what it wants to be, the model it needs to have, both in terms of structure and in terms of governance, and philosophically how Wales rugby structures itself going forward. Because, you know, the Irish model, the provinces carved out in history, union run, it's working for Ireland. The Scottish model with two sort of city clubs run by the SRU, it's working for Scotland. The French model, private businesses, working for France. The English model's been battered from pillar to post in the last year, but you know it's been a sort of robust model up until this point, the last few years, and certainly there's no suggestions they're going to change the model to a centrally contracted model at all. But what is Wales? You know, Wales is neither here nor there. It's ultimately a privately run set of businesses, but also need to have proper funding from the Welsh Rugby Union for release of their players. Such a big issue, so many different facets of it. And then you look at the actual leadership. The Welsh Rugby Union have hemorrhaged talent in the last 4 or 5 years. The last chief exec, the relationship with the regions was kind of non-existent. He's moved on. And now you've got two people in place, Ian Evans and Nigel Walker, who potentially don't have enough experience to manage this crisis. And there aren't loads of people in the Welsh Rugby Union who fit that bill either. So it's a mess in every single which way you look at it, unfortunately.
Yeah. I presume the BBC documentary, which prompted anarchy, I would imagine, behind the scenes, hasn't helped the situation. Then again, they've picked curious battles, i.e. in the midst of this crisis, Delilah was their main focus, one presumes, for several days. This will be sorted in the short term for a moment. This will be sorted, I would think, for the England game. I can't even imagine these players, as furious as they are, could bring themselves to go on strike and miss an England game.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. On the one hand, you go, well, what is the point of threatening strike action without going through with it? And there'll be a strong lobby of thought that would say, well, you know, this has got to hit Welsh rugby where it hurts for the union to get the message, or the PRB to get the message, or whoever to get the message. On the other hand, the players will also think, well, this is a huge day for the Welsh people, huge day for local businesses, and the ramifications for the tournament as a whole of having a game cancelled, not going ahead, would be profound, those ramifications. So you still think, even though we are edging towards D-Day, you still think it will get sorted in the short term. But even if it does, where does that leave Welsh rugby? You've got Malcolm Wall, the chairman of the Professional Rugby Board, coming out on Scrum 5 last night and saying belts need to be tightened in the short term. And there's a case for that. We're seeing it in lots of other rugby nations post-COVID. But he's also talking about needing to commercially grow the game as well. How do you commercially grow teams that aren't winning? How do you get teams winning when they're not being funded? You know, it's a chicken and egg. It's a bigger piece than just going, oh, get some more crowds in. You need crowds. Look at the crowds that would have come and watched the Ospreys team of sort of 07, 08, 09, star-studded. Yeah. Same with the Cardiff team that won the EDF in 09. So there's so many different facets to this, Joe, and they all have a knock-on effect to each other. And you look at the leadership and you go, right, they need to completely revolutionise the governance in Wales. The amateur game still has a stranglehold on the pro game because the majority of the board is made up of those who have been elected through the clubs. So you need a chairman that's independent, or a chairperson that's independent, and that chair can then go out and elect a CEO or get hold of a CEO that has the business acumen and experience to tackle this crisis, and then start from there. But at the moment, every single component part you look at, you think this is broken. And you then look at the regions who are gamely doing their best and picking up some great wins. Ospreys home and away, Montpellier. Scarlets had a really decent win on the weekend. Cardiff too. But if you don't know your budget, how do you attract talent? How do you keep talent? If the 60 cap rule goes, will there be an exodus? Look at the two hotshots in Welsh rugby at the moment, Daffy Jenkins and Chris Shinzer. They're coming out of Exeter. Exeter are stockpiling Welsh talent at the moment. More talent heading to Gloucester, we hear. So, I mean, it's just I don't have too many answers. Barset asking, do the regions need to go down to 3 so you could spread the money more sensibly? Is 4 too many for a rugby economy of Wales' size? And then the big decision that will not happen in the short term because there isn't the appetite among the English clubs is whether the Welsh would be better off in the England system. And that would then have huge ramifications to the URC, to Irish, to Scottish, Italian and South African rugby. That is not on the table in the short term, but it's something that senior figures in the game do see as potentially an option for Welsh rugby and for English rugby if you're going to build up the second tier. But yeah, these are all questions we're asking, and in the short term, we've still got this rumbling on in the game in doubt.
Yeah, it's going to be a very Welsh thing when they go out and beat England. And
I know.
That's the inevitable point.
It's the blessing and it's the blessing and the curse of Welsh rugby.
Yeah,
because you've been to Cardiff, Joe. It is so special.
I presume Gatland's success has allowed a stasis at union level to just take hold. I mean, yeah, regions aren't performing, but look how good we are generally. So there was never a crisis.
Well, it's a top-down approach, isn't it? It's a top-down approach that says, this is the cathedral of Welsh rugby, the Principality Stadium. Everything flows from this. And so you then sort of have this Welsh national senior team, then a gap to the community clubs who are represented on the board, and then the regions are kind of in that no man's land.
Yeah.
Where the community clubs don't think much of the regions, the Welsh Rugby Union don't think much of the regions. So you have this vicious circle of mistrust in Welsh rugby. You compare that to what you're seeing in Ireland and that symbiotic relationship between the provinces and the amount of money that the RFU gives to the provinces, the fantastic setup you've got at the schools in Leinster, and the model works. But the Welsh Rugby Union have not seen value in funding the regions, probably because they felt they can get a successful Welsh national side without funding the regions. But now the Welsh team is losing and the chickens are coming home to roost.
Very quick last word. I haven't talked to you since Borthwick. We spoke when he did take charge and looked back on the Jones era. What would you say of Borthwick's tenure thus far with the view to round 5 in Dublin?
I think it's about small steps. It's about the basics. It's stripping back the game plan. As we saw against Italy, it's not hugely exciting, but it's getting foundations in place. And the hope is that every session Borthwick and his coaches have with the players, they get better. They get better at the basics. They layer on their game. I mean, they're miles off Ireland in terms of sophistication of game plan, cohesion, ability to attack in those waves. But I think they're going to get there slowly, one step at a time. It really could have done with beating Scotland, because then with Italy at home and Wales in turmoil, they could have been 3 from 3 with a home game against France, and they could have kept building confidence. So I'm fascinated how they do in Dublin. That is the acid test in world rugby at the moment. And I'm fascinated how they do this weekend, because, you know, Borthwick is about, he's been really clear, Joe. He thinks he's got a lot to sort out from the Eddie Jones regime, but he feels he's got the tools in place to build steadily. But his message to England fans is it's not an overnight fix.
Okay, Chris, great to have you on. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot for having me. Cheers, Joe.
Cheers. Chris Jones there, the BBC, with us. Shorter Monday Night Rugby than usual. We'll be back previewing the weekend in plenty of depth on Wednesday Night Rugby. Rugby on Off the Ball is with thanks to Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.